Hi everyone, and welcome to our webinar today. It's fantastic to see so many of you here, especially to talk about such an important topic, which of course is how to drive diversity through recruitment. This webinar is going to last an hour, and we're going to send through a recording afterwards. Just a little bit of logistics. If you've got any questions as we go, please add them in the Q&A box. We'll try and answer them as we go, but if we can't, we'll get to them at the end. We're going to send a feedback form through at the end of the webinar today. Please do take the time to fill it out. It's really helpful for us in terms of what programming we're putting on next, what content we're covering, and then of course how to improve and what to do better in the future. So really looking forward to today. We're lucky enough to be joined by 5 expert speakers, all covering their own specialist area of diversity. So we've got Instant Impact's very own Rob Blythe, who's going to kick us off by outlining the key components of a successful diversity-centric recruitment strategy. And then he's going to do a bit of a dive into how to attract diverse candidates. Then we've got Kyati Sundaram, who's the CEO of Applied. Applied are a technology partner of ours who help companies to remove bias from the interview process. Kyati is going to be focusing on how to build a diversity-centric assessment process. After that, we've got Colleen Amos OBE and Kweku Norte from the Amos Bursary. Colleen's going to be introducing the charity, and then Kweku, who's a mentor there, is going to be answering any of your questions on how companies can best engage with their Black employees and potential employees. And finally, we've got Louise Maycock, who's head of talent at one of our key clients in Ipsos Mori. And Louise is going to run us through the steps that they've taken to improve their diversity, as well as what they're going to be focusing on moving forward. We're going to wrap it up with a quick summary and then move on to a Q&A if we've got time. We'll almost definitely have time. It's an action-packed agenda today, so my other job is to keep us to time. So if anyone goes over, I'm going to be there to politely speed them up. So hopefully today is going to be highly informative. And you're going to take away some immediately actionable insight from this hour. Ooh, having some slide issues. So before I hand over to our first speaker, Rob, I'd like to introduce Instant Impact and set the scene. So Instant Impact is a talent partnership business, and that means that we build and run high-performing internal recruitment functions for our clients. We provide the people, marketing, technology, and particularly relevant today, the expertise to help shape and deliver recruitment strategies from remote recruitment and onboarding all the way through to driving diversity, as we're talking about today. So whilst diversity has long been on the agenda and high up the agenda of the HR community and of our agenda, it's been brought forward and brought to the forefront for many leadership teams as a direct result of the Black Lives Matter movement going on at the moment. So going on globally at the moment, since lockdown, Rob and I have spoken to over 150 different companies, and I can honestly count on one hand those that don't have diversity as one of their top 3 business priorities. Now that's obviously fantastic, and it's absolutely as it should be. But when you look at the actual steps that businesses are taking or have taken, it's a very different story. So we sent a pre-webinar survey around, thanks to everyone that filled that in. The results were really interesting. So 43% of respondents don't have a diversity policy at their business. 56% of companies don't track diversity in either their recruitment or in their workforce itself. Only 10% were happy or very happy with the level of diversity in their business. And as you can see here, it's 0% are very happy. And despite everything going on at the moment, despite the international discourse, and the fact that it's really high on the agenda for businesses, only 30% of companies have a board that takes diversity seriously or very seriously. That said, there is room for optimism. It seems that for now, at least, Black Lives Matter protests in the wake of the horrific killing of George Floyd have given an impetus to diversity initiatives that we haven't seen before. So 97.3% of respondents think that their businesses will put at least one positive change in place as a direct response to the protests, and 51% report that their C-level team are taking diversity more seriously. So at Instant Impact, we think that and hope that one of the positives that comes out of such a terrible, awful tragedy is that businesses are going to come under more pressure, both from the public and perhaps even from government, on how that they're addressing and improving diversity. We've been blown away by the response to this webinar, and I know that you're all keen to learn about how to start improving diversity or improve what you're already doing. So I'm going to stop with my scene set. I'm going to hand the reins over to our expert speakers. Rob, happy to get us started?
Absolutely, and thanks, Felix, and reiterate the thanks to all of our panelists today. Really looking forward to it. So I wanted to get started by giving an overview of Instant Impact's methodology for driving diversity through recruitment. And we break it down into 3 core components. They are influencing internally, attracting a diverse pool of candidates, and ensuring that your selection process offers equal opportunities to all of those candidates. And whilst that might not be new to you, we speak with companies on an all too regular basis who, despite having a focus on driving diversity, have neglected one or more of those elements. And you can't have a truly diversity-centric recruitment process without all 3 of them working in harmony. As Felix just mentioned, Kiati from Applied, one of our preferred technology partners for driving diversity, is going to give a detailed run through of how to remove bias from your assessment process. So with her covering assessment, I'm going to focus on the first 2 components here. That's influencing internally and attraction. It's a lot to fit into a short slot, but I hope to provide some practical recommendations that you can follow regardless of the roles or experience levels that you're hiring at. And it's important to say before I start that at Instant Impact, we really feel strongly that this isn't about quotas, it's not about box ticking, and it's absolutely not about positive discrimination. It's about leveling the playing field so that everyone has an equal opportunity, regardless of ethnicity, gender, socioeconomic background, sexual orientation, whether they're able-bodied or disabled. And we work with companies to help them hire the best talent regardless of background, and to do that in a diversity-centric way. The first step is influencing internally. So before making any changes in HR or recruitment, it's first critical to get the buy-in of the wider business. There's no point in presenting a diverse stream of candidates at interview if your hiring managers aren't on board. Likewise, there's no point in hiring people from different backgrounds if you don't have an inclusive and welcoming environment for them to work in. And quite a few of the strategies that we're going to touch on today require a real mindset shift. For them to work, you need buy-in throughout the organization, starting at the very top. As the old saying in technology goes that a few of you may have heard of before, no one gets fired for buying IBM. And the same can be true with hiring. It's the safer option to stick with what you've always done. And a lot of people might ask, why would I hire someone who hasn't been to university instead of the Oxford graduates that have always worked so well for us? It's our jobs as leaders within the HR world to challenge that traditional thinking and to educate the people around us that a diversity-centric recruitment approach isn't about diversity for diversity's sake. It's about hiring the best quality talent and not being blinded by the background and privilege that some of us are blessed with as we grow up and in our early careers. So when you're proposing change to senior leaders, whether that's shifting your marketing spend from traditional channels or removing requirements for formal qualifications, we advise making the argument from a business perspective. Make it clear that you won't compromise on quality, that you're looking for the best talent, that you're assessing them rigorously, and that the result that you're working towards is diversity of background, diversity of thought, and diversity of opportunity for your business. This could probably be a whole seminar in its own right, and sadly we don't have the time for that now, but do let us know if there's anything that you'd like to follow up on there. Once you have the wider business on board and are building an ever more inclusive organization, you need to build a standard process and ensure that it's followed. Having a recruitment process designed to drive diverse applications won't make any difference if your hiring managers don't follow it. So make sure that they're on side and that they don't revert just to using the same old recruitment agencies they've always used or hiring from their existing networks. This requires continual education as well as celebration of the results that the best practice is delivering. So consider unconscious bias training as well as broader training on the process that you're implementing and the reasons behind that process. Improve the understanding of the issue that we're looking to address here, and then make sure to share any successes back with the organization and to continually strive to improve the process. The quest to be a diversity and inclusion centric business is never complete, and it's our role to make sure that it stays front of mind. So once you've got business buy-in and you've influenced internally, it's time to make sure that everyone has the opportunity to apply for your roles. There are 6 ways to attract diverse talent that I'd like to explore today. And as a first step, I'm going to run through how you can lay the foundations for a successful campaign by removing the barriers to entry. A Hewlett-Packard report that has been frequently quoted and was the subject of a Harvard Business Review article found that men apply for a job when they meet only 60% of the qualifications, but women apply only if they meet 100% of them. So the first big question to ask yourselves and your hiring managers is that really a requirement? Do you really need that professional qualification to do that job? And do you have to have 5 years of experience? It's our job as internal recruiters to ask why and to make sure that requirements only make it onto the job advert when they're exactly that. They have to be requirements. We'd encourage you to focus on the skills that you're looking for and the skills that are needed for the role, as well as why it's important for that position. We do recognise, though, that this might be a bit of a leap for hiring managers. So as a first step, consider using preferred or beneficial experience as that first step. Once you're happy with the substance of what you're looking for, you need to focus on the language. There's strong evidence that certain words can influence the likelihood of people applying from different backgrounds. So you need to make sure that your language isn't unintentionally putting particular candidates off, specifically here, those from different genders. So my colleague Frankie will share a link to a tool that we use to double check all of our job descriptions. And that link will also include the original research if you're interested in finding out more about gender coding. Once you put together your job description in the right way, you need to define and execute your advertising strategy. For that, we'd always start with the job board strategy. If your current selection of job boards aren't bringing you a diverse pool of high quality hires, it's time to reassess which job boards you use. We use a broad range of job boards at Instant Impact with all of our clients and work within those budget constraints. This not only means that the job can be seen by a wide range of candidates, but also by using more general job boards as well as industry specific ones, boards like LinkedIn, Indeed or Monster, you can attract candidates from other potentially more diverse industries. We'd also recommend looking at diversity-centric job boards like Versida if you want to take this a step further. Versida are a partner of ours that work as specifically diversity-centric job board and they attract 30% more diverse candidates as a result when compared with those traditional job boards. They also provide useful tips on how you can improve your adverts. Only 21% of our survey use these specialist job boards at the moment to drive applications, so it could also be an interesting area to get ahead of the competition. My last tip on job boards is to use data and to follow the results. Analyse the success of your application sources, not just in terms of hires, but also in terms of the diversity and volume of applications that they're generating. Also experiment. Adapt the advert if it's not working, and particularly focus on the job title that you use, as it's highly influential in who clicks to find out more and ultimately applies. Use A/B testing and be analytical in how you approach your advertising to get the best results. Job boards are far from the only attraction channel that we use. Only 1 in 10 companies do it, but working with partners supporting minority or disadvantaged groups can be a brilliant way to get your company in front of diverse candidates. There are lots of great organisations out there if you look hard enough. At the early career level, you can partner with universities, schools, or apprenticeship training partners. And for more experienced roles, you can partner with professional groups like Women in Finance or Coding Black Females. We're huge fans of the Amos Bursary. Our chairman, Parry, is a repeat mentor, and I know that Felix is in the process of signing up as one too. I won't go into any more detail though, because I don't want to steal Colleen and Kwaku's thunder, as they're going to go through it all later. We'd also recommend actively headhunting. Not only will it open up a pool of talent that isn't actively job seeking and massively reduce your reliance on recruitment agencies and the excessive spend that comes with it, but if you do it well, it can also have a positive influence on diversity. Train and encourage your internal recruitment team to try and present a diverse panel of candidates for every vacancy. Make sure that any headhunting you do is proactively diverse, rather than headhunting exclusively from groups that are underrepresented talent pools for your business. That way you can avoid employment law traps and the world of positive discrimination that we want to avoid. We know that this is an area that many companies are concerned about, so we're going to run a webinar in mid-August on how far companies can legally go in the pursuit of improved diversity, so watch this space. We'd also suggest focusing on your early career program if you do hire at that level. We've found that these programs can be so powerful in establishing the roots of diversity in an organisation, and Louise from Ipsos is going to talk all about that later. And if you look at the statistics, it's not surprising why. It's a shocking statistic, but in the UK, only 9.7% of executive positions are filled by women, when compared to 57% of students at university and a similar proportion who are starting apprenticeships being women. It's also the case that only 6% of top managerial positions are filled by employees from a BAME background, when compared with 20% of students who identify as BAME and 12.3% who are starting apprenticeships. With such a richly diverse talent pool, early career hiring can be a fantastic place to start. And given that it can be a really large proportion of a company's annual hiring, it's also a great way to move the needle and make a quick impact. The final point I'd like to make is on employer branding. Your employer brand is the element that ties together your diverse attraction strategy. It's the window that provides potential employees with a real view into what your business is like, what you do, what you believe in, as well as being really influential in determining which candidates apply and which candidates don't feel welcome and therefore don't apply. It's not just a case of making sure that stock images on your website are diverse. And if you try to fake it in this area, your existing employees will catch you out. So make sure that your employer brand is reflective of what you're doing as an organization as a whole. Creating an inclusive employer brand and reflecting that online with a celebration of all that work can create a really virtuous cycle as an inclusive organization. More candidates will find you through your social media and other activity. Those that do will be more likely to apply because they like what they see. When people join, they'll feel more welcome as they join the business, making your company a more diverse and inclusive place to work, and in turn making them more likely to refer their contacts to come and work there, which, coming back to the beginning again, makes it easier to attract, hire and retain more diverse employees. Be proud of the work that you're doing in this area and shout about it online. Whether they're the first steps or part of a long-term diversity strategy, you'll be amazed with the results. That's sadly all I have time for. If anyone wants more advice or guidance on what will work best for you, please do drop me an email or a call, as I'd love to help out. We're also running workshops throughout July, helping companies to review their attraction and assessment processes from a diversity stance point. Frankie, again, will share a link of how to sign up, as well as my contact details if you'd like to discuss anything further. And I really do hope you enjoy the rest of the webinar.
Thanks, Rob. That was really interesting and leads us really nicely onto our next speaker, Kiati. So Kiati, as I mentioned, is the CEO of Applied, a recruitment software that helps companies to remove cognitive bias from their assessment processes. Applied allow their clients to redesign the way they assess talent, removing reliance on stages that are poor predictors of in-role performance, but that also allow bias to creep in, like CV screening, and replacing them with work samples and structured interviews. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Felix. Thanks, everyone. So honored to be part of this conversation. It's so interesting that our organizations and teams have changed over decades, but not our selection processes. And people think it's often a pipeline problem, but it's not just a pipeline problem. We at Applied see a lot of common mistakes and bias and guesswork in hiring. And there is a big problem within this selection process. This is decades of data, over 40 to 50 years of data that says current systems don't work. And in fact, the current systems perpetuate systematic biases, as Felix and Rob have previously mentioned. So I'd like to share an example with you, which is quite a shocking example. Felix, do you mind moving to the second slide? Thank you. So in Germany in 2016, Sandra Bauer, which is a quintessential German sounding name, Sandra Bauer applied for a job as a personal assistant and was happily invited through to interview. At the same time, Miriam Osterg, which is not a German sounding name, also applied for the same job, and she never heard back from the company. This would normally otherwise be an unremarkable story, but you can see from the slide where I'm going. Turns out that Sandra Bauer and Miriam Osterg were one and the same person. And this study was repeated time and time again. This is in fact a study where you take fake applications, fake jobs, and all you change are minor superficial details on the CV or the application. In this case, Sandra Bauer's name was changed, although she kept the same picture in the application, and everything else in the application was the same. And what happens is, so I think, Felix, we're missing some animation, but thank you. What happens is you can see that there is a detrimental impact on the callback rate in interviews. So with Sandra Bauer, you have a 19% callback rate whereas with Merriam, you only have a 14% callback rate. And that's completely ridiculous when Merriam-Webster wears a scarf, because that callback rate goes to 4%. And these are just some of the scary stories and scary data pieces that we've gathered over the last 50 years. I mean, this is just the gender association of such a study, but there have been studies repeated where looking at race associations or even other parameters. For example, there was a study in the UK in the 1960s, and they've repeated that again and again. And the most recent variant was in 2018, where they found that if you don't have a white sounding name, you have to send 50 to 70% more CVs to get the same interview. And in the US, that discrimination equates to 5 more years of experience needed. So think about how much catching up underrepresented groups have to do to just get to the same level. And what's the really scary fact of the matter is that it's not just gender, it's not just race, it's assumptions about everything, how we look like, what our perceived sexual orientations are, how we are shaped. In fact, there's a study which says, if you change the shape of the human, if you send a slimmer picture or a more obese picture, the slimmer picture will get the job. And these are just mind-blowing facts that help put the perspective on the bigger problem. And we at Applied are very focused on helping companies build successful diversity playbooks, build diversity and culture from day one. And we do this by scaffolding the process so common mistakes in the selection process can be avoided. And there are 3 main ways we're looking at it. You use proven talent predictors, you remove unconscious bias from the selection process, and be very, very data driven. And I'll go into the details of some of these. So for the first one, the very common mistake is people are just hiring on gut. And a proxy for gut is what you see on the CV. Now, CV is just a piece of paper with lots of highly irrelevant facts, if we can call it that. And you use that as a proxy of whether the person can do the job. So whether I went to a brand named university or whether I worked at Google and not another engineering company is somehow predictive of whether I will be better at the job. And that's not true. What data suggests, as you can see on this slide, is that all of those pieces of information on the CV are the least correlated to what good talent means. So we should be testing for what really matters. We should be testing for what is the top bits of this slide, which is work sample tests. So you can call it job simulation tests, essentially questions that replicate real world challenges and will give the candidate an idea of what the job really means. And then you would progress from that stage of screening to doing interviews, and you should have structured interviews. So these are all of the bits that you can add in the process, which will add predictive validity to the process. And then the benefits are twofold. You end up avoiding all of the biases because it's very hard to train biases out, right? By definition, they are unconscious and you can't train them out. But you can design out the biases if you follow a systematic, structured process. And therefore, it's very important how you're looking at the screening process and how you're systematizing some of these. And you can do this without having a tool such as ours. It's just harder to do because we make it easier because it's all behind a button, but you can do all of these things in your process. The second way that we do this is we look at removing all of the other extraneous bits of information that come through in a CV or a resume or a cover letter that are not relevant. So we anonymize the CV. We actually say you shouldn't use a CV, at least not in the first selection stage. But if you are using it, then you should anonymize them to remove all sorts of biases associated with how we infer names. We don't want to just stop there. Our tool takes into account other sorts of biases. So even moving beyond anonymization, if you look at, there's something called halo effects. So for example, if Felix has applied to a job through us, if Felix has done really well at skill A, I will assume that Felix is really great at skill B and skill C, and therefore I will judge him more leniently. And those are halo effects, which we want to avoid, because I don't necessarily know if Felix is great at skills B and C. I'm just hypothesizing from my assumptions of skill, how he's performed on skill A. We also see ordering effects, which are essentially, if your CV turns up at 5 p.m. as opposed to 10 a.m. on my desk, I will judge you differently because of the time of day, of how tired I am, whether I've eaten, whether I've not eaten, all of those things matter. So we see ordering effects, and what we do is randomize to negate those kinds of effects. So we've done a lot of research. We've taken the best available behavioral science and data science research and baked that in our tool to negate all of these kinds of biases that inform us all of the time and can cause noise in decision making. And the third thing that's very important, and this is going back to something that Rob mentioned, which is be very analytical about everything that you do in your selection process. So we measure everything. We provide a granular diagnostic process to the extent of which questions or which parts of the process are causing adverse impact. Can you actually go in and see which kinds of person gave what sorts of reviews on what candidates? And then can you iterate on them? That's very important. What do you learn from that diagnostic process? And how do you iterate on it to prevent the kinds of biases that have prevent the system over time? I know this sounds a lot of work, but it is all achievable. Of course, our tool makes it easy, but we know a lot of companies doing this themselves, and there's ways you can adopt this even if you didn't have a tool, right? There's the 80-20 principle. Can you even move the needle by removing bulk of the biases? And you can do that, yes, by anonymizing, by randomizing, by not just selecting on the basis of CVs, but actually testing on what matters, which is skills. And the last thing I think I want to leave you with is this. I think this is a challenge because it's something very new, and hiring hasn't changed for 100 years, right? So saying something that is so novel and so revolutionary often gets the remark of whether it actually works. And we have over hundreds of clients across countries where we are seeing that this actually works. We have, not in terms of just time saved over a regular hiring process, we've seen that this has demonstrable impact on diversity statistics. And I know right now we are being very sensitive about slicing and dicing the data, but unfortunately all of the historic data is only categorized under BAME. But we've seen 50% more BAME hires with this client of ours, which is London Sport, which is a great partner of ours. And their mandate was, can the company become more like London, become more representative of London within 12 months? And they managed that with our tool. And they've also seen a lot of increase in the interview quality. In fact, throughout our application process, we've seen 3 times improvement in the quality of people who land at the interview stage, because we know we've done a very thorough assessment of them prior to the interview stage. So all in all, I think the way to incorporate this is in companies who don't have the budgets or to buy such a tool is still, if you can take the best pieces of information, and I have my colleague Patrick up here, you might be able to connect with us after, is to take the best pieces of information, the best available research, and incorporate that somehow in your current processes. That would be my advice right now. That's all, Felix.
Well, thank you so much. I think I probably speak for everyone here in saying that was really, really informative and absolutely fascinating. And just for all the attendees, we're going to share Applied's contact information in the follow-up email to here, and I'm sure we'll send some information around about them as well. So do feel free to get in touch. So next up, I'm really excited to be able to introduce Colleen Amos OBE and Kweku Norte from the Amos Bursary. Amos Bursary is a charity that ensures that talented young men of African and Caribbean descent acquire the skills and mindset that they need to move from potential to performance in both higher education and in the professions as well. So Colleen is going to be introducing the charity itself, and then Kweku, who was is a mentor there, has agreed to answer any questions that we have on our minds about what more employers can do to better engage with Black employees and potential employees. And in Kweku's own words, he wants this to be an opportunity for everyone to ask that awkward question that you've been wanting to ask for a while, but haven't yet, and no judgment. So if you've got that question, just pop it in the Q&A or in the chat. I'll keep an eye on both. Well, that's enough for me. Colleen, over to you.
Right, thank you very much, Felix, for such a wonderful opportunity. I feel very special speaking to so many HR specialists today. So my name is Colleen Amos, and I am CEO and founder of the Amos Bursary, and I also have my own consultancy, and the focus is very much on diversity, inclusion, and high performance. And the Amos Bursary was established in 2009. And we set it up for one reason, and one in memory of my parents, but actually also to recognize the challenges that young men of African and Caribbean descent face when they try to enter certain professions. And basically what we do as a charity is very simple. We provide the pipeline for you as HR professionals. The challenge for these young people begin very, very early. And for us, we identify them at the age of 16 when they have achieved their GCSE results. And we use that because we know that if our young men are to compete effectively, they have to have the academic rigor that's required by most corporate organizations. So we select the young men at 16, they go through a recruitment process, and they have to do an interview, they have to fill in an application form, they have to write a personal statement, they are then selected, they then have an interview at Linklaters where they have to arrive suited and booted, and they are then interviewed by a panel. And immediately it sets for them the standard that they know that will be expected of them if they make it onto the program. And last year, just to allay your fears in terms of any worries about there being a shortage of young men of African and Caribbean descent who will not be available for you to recruit, we had 180 applications for 15 places. So you can see that the young men are out there. And when they join the Amos Bursary, what we do is to take them on a transformational journey. So they'll join the Amos Bursary, and we basically do 4 things with them. The first thing is that we look at their academics, but we help them to raise their heads, give them the confidence to recognize that they're outstanding by making them talk about the fame, the successes that they've had, by encouraging them to apply for awards, scholarships, recognitions, anything that makes them feel that yes, I have a place at this table. The second thing that we do is to give them the opportunities and experiences that they would normally have no access to. So our young men are taught immediately they join the bursary how to network. They have networking experiences that they go through. We have the international experience, and you and I know that if a student has international experience on their CV, it tends to be, it's taken as being significantly important. So we encourage our students to undergo international experience. We also really encourage them to apply for internships, and we do that from an early stage. So from year 13, they are encouraged to apply for internships. And we also encourage them to play golf, learn cricket, do rugby, all of the skills that we know that once they enter the corporate workplace, they will be the things that will be spoken about. We even encourage them to go skiing. So moving on from kind of the opportunities, the next thing that we do is the learning and development. And this is very extensive. So we have something like 35 different development days that we hold a year. And those opportunities are the skills development and the personal development. Organizations tend to provide students with very little opportunity to work out who they are. But within organizations, you know and I know that one of the first things that you do for somebody who's promoted to a senior management post or even a management post is to do a personality profile test with them. They do Myers-Briggs, and there are so many different iterations of that. We use one of those tools, Lumina Spark, with our young men. And immediately they understand who they are, they understand who their challenges are, what their challenges are, they understand the development that they need to take. And they follow that as they make their journey through the bursary. They're with us for 5 years, so there's lots of learning that they have to do. So we support them at the different transitions in their life. So from year 12, when they're applying for university, we help them with that. When they secure their places at university, we make sure they're ready for university. When they're at university, we support them through an environment which for many of them, because they apply potentially to the top universities, it means that they're going into an environment which is very different. And we give them the support and training to make their way through that. And then finally, we help them with their applications for employment. But the learning and development days are much more than that. Yes, we teach them all of the skills. We teach them public speaking, presentation. They're taught how to network. They know how to give their elevator pitch. They know how to dine like a diplomat. They're given cultural awareness. They're given commercial awareness training. They have all of that. But the one thing that they say is special about the bursary is that they know that they have over 200 young men who are like themselves, who are all academically able, exceptional, excellent young men who are ready to take their place in the corporate environment. So as an organization, the last thing that we do is ensure that all of our young men really focus on giving back. And they know that it's important that they not only give back to the Amos Bursary as a charity, but they give back to their communities that they live in. And ultimately, some of them give back to UK PLC because they support different charities that are important to them as a family. So in a nutshell, that's what the Amos Bursary do. We create the pipeline for you as an organization. And my ask for you today is that you get in contact and we have a chat and talk about how you as HR specialists can support the Amos Bursary on our journey. I'd like to really introduce Kwaku now. Kwaku has worked with the Amos Bursary for years. He has supported our young men as mentor. He supports them in terms of their applications for employment. He's an amazing young man, and I'll hand over to him now.
Thank you. That was a very nice introduction. So hi, I'm Kwaku. I've got 10 years experience in finance. Initially started off at university, did an engineering degree and master's. Ended up in China working for a telecoms firm over there. Came back to London, worked for JP Morgan, 7 years. Went to business school, graduated from my MBA, and what have I done? Worked in private equity and venture capital, and now co-founder of a Prime Planet, which is a travel startup.
Oh, fantastic. Well, first of all, thanks, Colleen, as well. Really, really interesting. And we've got some really interesting questions about the Amos Bursary, which we'll come to at the end at the Q&A. But thank you so much. And I can definitely speak, having gone to your awards, how impressive the young men on the bursary are. And thanks, Kwaku, as well for joining. Can you just tell us a little bit how you're involved with the Amos Bursary?
Absolutely. I think my first encounter to the corporate world was in 2009, which is when the Amos Bursary started. And I've put a link in the chat about growing up black in London. One of the big things I experienced growing up in London is that there's a lot of difficulties and there's a lot of no's that you encounter. So one of the things that I thought, I had to give back, and I've also known Colleen. I think Colleen's probably known me since I was in nappies, perhaps, So I thought I have to give back. I have to actually show the route in which, young people can get into the corporate world, and also break a lot of myths that, existed. So that's one thing that, was one of our passions as a whole and a collective, going into banking to give back.
So what sort of myths do you work with? Do you work to dispel?
I've seen someone put in a chat here, for instance, which is a good question. We're teaching them that hold on, where's it gone? In terms of teaching kids how to play rugby, go skiing and playing golf to fit into the big corporate world. I actually agree with Yasmin in that chat. And I think that's one thing that if the kids have a passion in playing golf, Amos Bursary gives an opportunity to do that, which is brilliant. And it also doubles up by having, being easy to fit into the corporate world in terms of having conversations with people. So that's brilliant. But at the same time, one of the big things I want to push to a lot of people in this chat is accept people from being, for being themselves. Be unapologetically yourself. And I think organizations need to adjust in terms of how they, view people in general, I think.
Absolutely. And I think if anyone hasn't read Kweku's article on growing up Black in London, it's fantastic, really, really eye-opening. And I think one of the things it really addresses and touches on is what it's like being Black in London, of course, but I guess most relevant for us, what it's like being a Black employee in the corporate world in London. And Kweku, I was wondering if you could share some thoughts in this environment on that.
Yeah, that's a very open-ended question. I think it's very challenging. It's very challenging being Black. I think one of the biggest issues that we face is that there is no real representation. There is no one that looks like me in all the organizations I've worked in. Whether it's junior, whether it's senior, it's a lack of representation. And I think that, goes into the whole hiring process that firms use. For example, given the experience that I even have, I've sent over 300 applications and I've received no feedback. It just goes into this black hole. So I think the question is about how do we get talent coming into the organization? And also, if that talent does get into the organization, how do you retain that talent? Those are the big agendas, I think, that is worth addressing.
Absolutely. And I think there are two really interesting points there. I think one of the things that we often hear, and I think Colleen touched on it before, is that a lot of companies say to us, oh, well, we really want to hire more diverse talent from whatever, whatever background that happens to be. But, we just can't find the right people. We can't find the right people from the right backgrounds. What are they doing wrong?
I think that's a lazy answer, to not sound too blunt. I think talent exists in all forms, and talent hasn't got a racial limit to, a racial barrier to talent. There's no racial barrier to talent. My thing is, it's the screening. Where are you currently hiring from is the question. So take banking as an example. Most people hire from 5 to 6 universities, Russell Group universities, or not Russell Group, Red Brick. And one of the problems I find with that is that's very old and archaic, because it made sense in the 20th century when the UK was very homogenous. So you would expect the talent to be concentrated in like 6 universities. That's no longer the case. I, for one, have never had a passion or a desire to go to Oxford because I simply wouldn't fit in. So I think organizations need to expand the net of universities that they hire from. I think universities need to do a better job of getting more talent coming through. And again, I'm thinking off the top of my head, I think organizations need to be better at, spotting what talent is. There is no real template of what, talent should be. So I think just expanding the net would be a good starting point.
Absolutely. And I think just to add to that, obviously not just looking at universities, but apprenticeship programs as well can be really positive as well. Yeah. I'm afraid we've only got time for one more question. We've already gone over, but it's too interesting to cut you off quite yet. That's right. But I think the other thing I really wanted to address with you is, I think when we were chatting in advance of this, you mentioned that a lot of people had asked you about them seeing a lot more attrition with their with Black employees. And I wanted to ask you whether you had any advice for companies, maybe they're majority white and trying to change that, but regardless of where they start, what can they do to give more support to their Black employees?
think it starts with getting some data. We need to get some, the ethnicity pay gap, or the report. I still haven't seen that on the numbers from there. And it boils down to for me anyway, in banking, I think one of the main reasons why a lot of Black people tend to leave is because you realize you're managing people who are earning more money than you. And then it's just like, whoa, what on earth is going on? So most people in the corporate world tend to leave to start their own ventures because they can really grow culture from scratch and actually, impact or create wealth for their particular company and themselves. So I think pay is a big reason why attrition is an issue. Also, I think just generally it's uncomfortable being Black in the corporate environment. Colleagues, I think culture is set from the top, but it's implemented from mid-management, and there is no representation, so that culture doesn't filter down. So irrespective of CEOs and the C-suite setting the tone from the top, they need to put operatives in place to ensure that this is the culture is being passed down to the employees that exist. So that for me is the first thing that needs to be addressed.
Absolutely. I think to your point around where people are finding talent, one of the things that we often encourage our clients who operate in a whole industry that's not very diverse or inclusive, then we will often look at sort of things that Rob mentioned before, which is where are the requirements? Are they absolutely needed? For example, we look at some transferable skills from other industries so that they can bring in mid-managers instead of waiting for 15 years whilst the grad class comes up as well.
Yeah, I think so. I think we need to be very clear that no company needs to compromise in talent. The talent exists, right? Use your existing networks within your organizations to, as in, come to me, ask me, do I know 10 people? Do referral programs using a good Black people that will, ethnic minorities that exist in your firms to expand your net. And I think as long as there's an intent from HR and just general management to improve diversity, it can happen, because this is not rocket science. I'm not an HR professional, but everyone has an opinion on this matter, and it frankly needs to just be fixed.
Amen. Well, thank you very much. That's all we got time for. Would it be all right if we shared some of your contact details as well, so people can? Fantastic.
I've put on the chat, so I think it's all there.
Thank you very much, and I'm sure we'll come back to you in the Q&A at the end.
Awesome.
So really thought-provoking, both Colleen and Kwaku. Thank you so much for joining us. So our final speaker today is Louise Maycock. Louise is the head of talent at Ipsos Mori, and diversity and inclusion has been a key board level priority for some time there, and that's only been heightened by recent events. So diversity is a cornerstone of our talent partnership with Ipsos Mori, and I'm really delighted that Louise has agreed to talk us through their journey of diversity-centric recruitment, as well as some of the further changes that they have on the horizon. Thanks for joining us, Louise.
Morning, everybody. Very excited to be with you today to share what we've done so far. Listening to the previous speakers, my thoughts are we've done a lot, but there's a lot more still to do. So let me talk you through where we started, really. So as Felix said, we've had a focus on diversity and inclusion for probably 2.5 years now. I kind of did a shout out early 2018 to anyone in the business who was interested in joining me in a diversity and inclusion group and see if we could affect some change around the business. I got about 25 people, which was really encouraging. And we kind of muddled through a little bit, engaged the board, and made some kind of impactful changes, I think, in terms of things like policy. We ran some unconscious bias training, we looked at our reward processes, tried to remove bias where we could, did things like we now match paternity and maternity pay, which was quite revolutionary at the time and goes down really well with our employees, ran unconscious bias training, that kind of thing. So we evolved diversity and inclusion as much as we could, and then we decided we needed a bit of a rebrand and to raise the profile. So we rebranded ourselves as Belong, because that's how we want people to feel at Ipsos Mori, that they belong with our organisation. And as part of that, we have successfully created, well, the employees have created a number of really engaging networks. So we have a women's network, we have a BAME network, which is called Reach. We have a Pride Network, a Parent and Carers Network, and an EU Nationals Network. And they've been absolutely fundamental in making change and engaging the wider organisation and the things that we've tried to do around diversity and inclusion. So that's kind of our sharper focus on D&I. My kind of particular role is obviously head of talent, is looking after, one of my roles is looking after recruitment. And as I think it was Rob said earlier, that a good place to start is in early careers, and we realised that. So we made that our focus of the things that we wanted to achieve. So about the same time, so around 2018, we started talking to Instant Impact about working with them. And we are traditionally a graduate employer, you know, even probably 5 or so years ago, an Oxbridge employer, which, you know, wasn't really seeing what we wanted in terms of diversity in both applications and hires. So started working with Instant Impact, and they helped us review our approach to our recruitment and how we did our attraction and selection. One of the key changes that we made was we managed to persuade the UK Management Board to agree to remove the academic requirements to apply. So we'd previously required applicants to have a 2-1 degree as a minimum and 300 UCAS points, but they agreed that we could remove that, which obviously opens up the application field for many more people to apply. We also have a blind application process, so rather than a CV in the first instance, all of our graduate applications come through on an application form, which Instant Impact help us to screen, so we don't know who they are and whether they get through the process or not. So that's really been positive. And as a result, I guess, of the removal of, we were looking at our 2019 data. So what our first full year looked like of our new process around our graduate hiring, and 15% of the grads that we hired would have been rejected previously at CV screen because of their academic requirements. So it means that we've obviously made some, you know, progress in terms of allowing a wider group of people to be successful in our business, which is really good. The other thing that we looked at in our 2019 data was that 26% of our intake are from the BAME background, which is a really pleasing thing for us to see. One of the other things slightly unusual, I'd say, we have a very female orientated organisation. So for those of you that don't know, Ipsos Mori, we're a market research agency, global organisation, but we at the moment we're talking about the UK. We're very female. So one of our goals, sometimes we'd end up with a whole cohort of grads that were female, and the business just kind of weren't comfortable with that. So we actually worked with Instant Impact to attract more males, which I know is slightly unusual in the world of D&I, but anyway, so we've done a great job there as well. So we went from 28% male hires right up to 47%. So that's just something interesting, I think. As well as the graduate programme, Early Careers obviously incorporates things like placements and internships, which we then work through to pipeline into grad roles. One of the key things that I'm working on at the moment is new entry points, I call them, in terms of how can we get people from different backgrounds who may not decide to go to university for various reasons, how can we get those into the industry? So we run apprenticeships. We run them at the moment in project management, data analysts, we have one HR, finance, etc. And that's been really interesting to see the apprentices that come through. And again, we have a much more diverse mix of people in our apprentice roles than we have previously seen in graduate roles, for example. Another exciting thing is that I am currently chairing the Trailblazer group for a new apprenticeship in market research, which doesn't as yet exist. But that will be really positive, because it means that we can bring apprentices into our core part of our business. And I'm thinking about how we can, you know, potentially have a percentage of a commitment to a percentage of apprentices to fulfil grad roles, as well as, kind of research executive roles, rather than come through the university graduate route. So there's some really exciting stuff that we're thinking about in early careers there around apprenticeships. And finally, just for kind of a bit of background, we have a couple of really strong school partnerships. So our main office in London is in St Catherine's Dock, so pretty much in Wapping. And we have schools partnerships with local school in Southwark. We're building one soon in the Nunhead area and also in Wembley. So we do work with them in terms of sort of personal brand, CV work, and also a strong work experience programme. So we bring the students in. We have, I think last year we had about 30 work experience students coming in. So they get to see what it's like within the corporate world and whether they like market research, and therefore can we start to pipeline them from that kind of age. So that's kind of the early careers journey that we've been on, with a lot of support from Instant Impact, which I'm very, very grateful for. And then I suppose just move on quickly to what's next. Lots of things I've heard this morning makes me think, oh gosh, definitely need to do that, definitely need to do that. Some things we do have a strong ambition to open our industry up and our organisation to a wider demographic. We want to look at where we advertise, like Rob was saying, look at what job boards are we using, what's our social media saying, how can we attract people into our organisation. We want to continue to use tech to remove bias, so I might talk to Applied about that. We're going to continue training our managers, again, as Rob said, to help them understand why this is important, what difference it makes. Continue our partnerships with schools. We've also got a close partnership with Queen Mary University London, and we'll continue that. And the Amos Bursary, Colleen, I will probably be in touch to have a conversation, because that sounds really interesting. We have a programme where we recruit refugees into our business, and that for the future is something we want to continue to do and expand on. Obviously the apprenticeships as a pipeline I've mentioned, but basically we want to replicate what we've done in early careers in our experience hire space. And I know Kwaku mentioned the ethnicity pay gap. We have committed to report on the ethnicity pay gap by the end of this year. So that's something that we're looking to do around data and making sure that we know where we're working from and what goals we need to achieve. So lots to do. Again, happy to share, talk, or any questions anyone has.
Well, thanks so much, Louise. I really appreciate it. I think hearing how you're actually doing it really brought some of the advice that we've heard so far today to life. And I think thanks all to all of our panelists really on everything. I think one of the things I really enjoyed about the session today is on how practical it is and how I guess people can take action from it. I think Kwaku, really, I liked your call to action especially at the end. Let's just get on it and do it. A lot of it is more action based than having to think really long and hard about it. Of course, there's expertise in there as well, but action's 80% of the way there. I think so. If I could encourage everyone, there's never going to be as good an opportunity, or there hasn't been so far as good an opportunity to make really wide change within your organization. CEOs are bought in, politicians are bought in, the public are bought in. So I really take some action, get in touch with Kiati and Apply to get rid of your CV screening, reach out to the Amos Bursary, and we can really make some differences. So I just wanted to, we don't have a lot of time left, but I do want to take a couple of questions. Let me just pull up the Q&A. So a question for, hang on, that one we've kind of covered. So a question from Andrea Ramsey. Given that men are more likely to apply for roles they do not have all of the experience for, is there risk with having strongly feminine coded job descriptions? Many of us are. So I'm going to ask that question to Rob, who tackled the question around gender coding.
Thanks, Felix. Well, I think with all of these things, there's always a risk of going too far or doing and doing too little. I think that the main thing is that you're aware of it and looking at it. And if you've got a job description that is overly coded towards feminine language, and you therefore see a massive spike in the number of women applying and men are not as encouraged to do so, then that becomes problematic. So be aware of it, be aware of what you're trying to achieve, which is, I think, a general theme today has been hiring the best talent, and make sure that you're looking at that data to see what's coming through as a result. We'd never encourage actively trying to code the language of a job description in one direction or another, but we do encourage being aware of how it's set up and changing based on the results of what comes from it. I hope that covers that for you, Andrea.
Yeah, no, thanks, Rob. And a question from Matt Wells, I think I'll take. So, does positive discrimination still have a role if companies really want to change their organisation? Fortunately, Matt, I think I'm not an employment lawyer, but I am pretty sure that positive discrimination is in itself is illegal. Unfortunately, a bit of a moot point on that one. But absolutely, I think that taking steps to ensure that we level the playing field, that really does have a role in terms of attracting talent.
Yeah, and I'll just add in there quickly, Felix, as well, that setting aims is great, and the aim of being a diverse organisation is fantastic. It's then the execution of that, and we would never advise that if you're making a decision about who to hire, it should always be the best person for the role. That's the crux.
Absolutely. Well, unfortunately, everyone, that's all we have time for today. Thanks again, everyone that came, and that's it from us. So I just want to leave you with news of what we've got planned. So as a follow-up to this, we're going to be running Matt, to your question before, a webinar on how far companies can go legally, and we are going to get an employment law specialist in on that one. We're also running on the 29th of July a webinar on breaking out of lockdown, looking at mental health and other issues around reassimilating into the workplace. Finally, we're going to be putting together and sending around a white paper following on from this webinar and the survey that so many of you so kindly filled out. And those of you that didn't, please, it'd be great if you could take the time to fill it out as well. And I just wanted to finish with a thought, and it's to follow on from my point before. This is going to be the best time we're ever going to, or that we've seen so far, to make changes and make huge strides here. So don't wait around, because one of two things are going to happen. Either, God forbid, the world moves on and loses focus on this issue and we lose momentum, or what I think will happen, and what I hope will happen, is that companies all around the UK and all around the world are going to act, and your company is going to be the one playing catch up. And you don't want to be having that conversation with your employees explaining why you were so slow to act. So none of us want to be on the wrong side of history here. Let's all be brave. Let's all take actions, and let's all actually do things. So thanks so much for joining today, and have a good rest of your afternoon.